Heyo everybody, this is IcicleFerret, and let's talk some Warframe. In an earlier video, when I was talking about the Hydroid rework, I mentioned that Hydroid was a control frame, and that every frame in Warframe, every frame in the game Warframe, falls under one of four broad categories, them being offense, defense, support, and control. And I just kind of wanted to take a minute to go a little further into detail about what I meant with that. So Warframe's not like your traditional MMO. It doesn't have any rigid classes or jobs, kind of like Final Fantasy XI or World of Warcraft has. It's kind of got these more, I don't know how really to describe them, general categories. And part of the reason they did this was because of the randomness of the matchmaking. You don't really know who you're going to get thrown into a party with, so you have to make sure that all of your Warframes in that group can still complete the mission. Another reason they probably did this, obviously I'm not a developer so I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing it's because of just the pace of the game. It's very fast compared to normal MMOs. This is more of a shooter type game where you're just running and gunning, so all of your frames, you don't really have time to coordinate with your squad, so if all of your frames can do a little bit of everything, then there's a higher chance that people are going to be satisfied that they've done a good job with their chosen frame. But beyond that, the four broad categories, as I mentioned, are just that. They're broad category, and there's plenty of overlap between them, and there are many frames that can do 2, 3, even 4 of those things, just with varying degrees of competency. So I'm going to start talking about the offensive frames. Now, I classify offensive frames as frames whose abilities facilitate an aggressive sort of playstyle. So the abilities are geared towards dealing damage or moving forward, or basically mobility. One of the first examples of this that players probably will encounter is Ember. She's pretty much designed just to deal raw fire damage to the enemy. So her first ability, Fireball, just straight up deals fire damage to the enemy. Her second ability makes enemies take more damage from fire attacks. Her third ability creates a ring of fire on the ground that will damage any enemy that walks into it. And her fourth ability just makes everything explode around her and deals fire damage. So if you take all 4 of these together, it's pretty obvious that she is an offensive frame. She's designed to deal damage. Now, I also mentioned that in my definition, frames that focus a lot on mobility are also offensive. And for that, I kind of point to Nezha as a good example. He's naturally fast. His passive ability is that he slides farther and experiences reduced friction. So he can be a very quick frame, gets around quickly, and even when he activates Firewalker, that ability, or that trait of his, is magnified. He also has the Warding Halo ability, which protects him from melee damage. And one of the most effective ways that I found to play Nezha is to activate Warding Halo, activate Firewalker, and then just throw myself headlong at the enemy. This will cause them to catch fire, cause them to panic, and the Warding Halo protects me personally from damage while I'm literally in the thick of the enemy. The second category of frames that I mentioned were the defensive frames. These are frames which are kind of designed towards staying in place and digging in, creating a bunch of defenses that the enemy has to wade through in order to get to their target, whether that be you or a defensive pod, whatever. I'd say the poster boy for defensive frames would be Frost. Pretty much every single one of his abilities is slow and or stationary. So his first ability, it's kind of like the opposite of Embers. It's a little ball of ice that shoots out, but instead of burning the target, it causes them to freeze in place for a few seconds. His second ability, Ice Wave, again, he stands in a stationary spot and sends a wave of ice out, which freezes enemies in their tracks. His third ability is the iconical Snow Globe, which creates a protective bubble around a certain area. His fourth ability is Avalanche, and it's a very slow cast ability. You're not designed to be in a hurry when you're using it. You're kind of supposed to be in a safe space in your snow globe, and when you cast it, it creates a ring of cold and ice that freezes enemies in place and deals damage to them. Another good example would be Vauban. Most of his abilities are stationary. Once you cast them, you can't really move them, so he's kind of designed to lock down a certain area and prevent enemies from getting to it. Another thing that these two frames have in common is their movement speed. Neither of them are particularly fast. Their design is not conducive to moving anywhere with any sort of haste, so they're predisposed towards staying in one spot, staying stationary, and letting the enemy come to them. The third category are support frames, and one of the best examples of these types of frames is Trinity. Pretty much all of Trinity's abilities are not geared towards dealing damage, rather, but helping your allies, healing them, providing them with energy, and just in general reducing the damage that they take. Another good example of a support frame would be Equinox, in my opinion. She can heal her allies, she can reduce the amount of damage they take from enemies, or she can increase their ability strength. And last but not least, we have the control frames. These are frames that are designed to control the enemy, and I don't think there's a better example of this than Nyx. Nyx is literally the mind control frame. She can grab an enemy and make them fight for the Tenno. She can inflict radiation on them with her, her Psychic Bolts ability. And she can cause enemies to fight one another rather than fighting the Tenno using one of her other abilities. Another good example of a control frame, in my opinion anyway, is Nidus. His second ability, Larva, can grab enemies and pull them into a big cluster before sending them flying. He also has abilities that will stun enemies or cause them to flail around ineffectually. He can even transfer any damage that he takes onto another enemy. Now, just because a frame falls into one of these broad categories doesn't mean it's stuck there. Frames can be modded to favor different abilities, for example, favoring power strength over range, or using one ability more than the other, can drastically change the way the frame is played. For example, even though Equinox is more of a control frame, some people modify for her ability that puts enemies to sleep and deals damage. This would make her more of a control frame and an offensive frame than a support one. Additionally, there are augment mods that can change or alter the way various abilities work. These can boost a frame's performance in one category. For example, Nezha's Pyroclastic Flow augment causes him to deal even more damage upon deactivating his Firewalker ability. Or they can add a whole new facet to the way the frame is played. For example, Nezha's other mod, Safeguard, allows him to cast Warding Halo on his allies, giving him some measure of support. There are also plenty of embers that run around with the Firequake mod. This makes enemies fall down when they are hit by the World on Fire ability, and this gives her some incredible crowd control. Now, you may be wondering why this matters. What does it all mean to the game? Warframe has some very deep mechanics, and if you understand some of the basics behind those, it can actually make you a better player. It can help you find frames that already suit your playstyle, and it can even challenge you to play frames differently. Personally, I think that pulling back the hood on these kinds of games and really looking into what makes them tick can also give you a better appreciation for the game. I mean, on the surface, Warframe seems pretty simple. Find big gun, point at enemy, shoot. But once you really start to deconstruct the game and you look at all the little bits and pieces of it, it becomes so much more than that. It's absolutely fascinating to me how game developers can take just a few mechanics and create virtually endless possibilities with them. I mean, I've been playing this game for 2 years now, and there are still things that I'm just now learning. And for a free game, that is absolutely awesome. So hats off to the Digital Extremes team. But I think I've been rambling for long enough at this point. I'm going to sign off now before this video gets any longer. If you guys want me to talk more about each of the different categories of frames in depth, maybe even examine each frame individually, let me know and I can certainly work on more of those videos. These do unfortunately take a little more time than your standard gameplay videos, so please don't expect them super quickly. I do have a job and a life outside of YouTubing. But yeah, that's all I got for now. Stay frosty, my friends, and I will see you next time.